Hello and welcome to Raspberry Pi on the Fly, your source for quick and easy Raspberry Pi tutorials. So you're interested in Raspberry Pi. Working with Raspberry Pi can be a little bit intimidating at first, but it's not too different from using a Windows computer once you get familiar with it. That's why I've written this article and designed this YouTube tutorial to help you get started with your new Raspberry Pi. This video connects with the blog seen on screen here, as well as the blog connecting with this video. So let's get into it. The first thing I'm going to talk about here is what you'll need. And that is one Raspberry Pi. I will be using Raspberry Pi 4 Model B for this tutorial, but it will work with any model. One micro SD card. I recommend 32 gigabytes or bigger. One power supply, that is the power brick that you'll use to plug your Raspberry Pi into the wall. It will run with any cell phone power brick, but you should probably buy one that is specifically designed for Raspberry Pi, as some of the cell phone ones do not quite supply enough power for especially the larger models of Raspberry Pi, including the Raspberry Pi 4. You'll need one display cord, this is usually an HDMI cable, one monitor or TV, one USB mouse and keyboard, and very important here is that you will need another computer to set up your Raspberry Pi. Now this can be done with any type of computer, including a Raspberry Pi itself, assuming that you've set one up in the past before and are needing a refresher on how to set another one up. If you don't have access to another computer, you can do it using a computer from a school or even a public library. And last of all, you will need a micro SD card reader, and this can be either a built-in one in your computer or a USB one. Apart from that, for beginners, I would recommend purchasing, if you're going to purchase a Raspberry Pi, a kit similar to the one from Conakit here on this link, that often include things like heat sinks, fan, and case. And these will help your computer to run faster because it's running cooler. But the Raspberry Pi will run without the heat sinks and without the case and without the fan. But these kits are really great for beginners because they do come with a power supply that works well with the Raspberry Pi, as well as with some of these extras that will make your Raspberry Pi basically work better, especially if you're going to be using it as a desktop computer. This is where the video tutorial will be linked, and our first step to actually setting up the Raspberry Pi is to download an operating system. So an operating system is a piece of software that supports basic operations of a computer, things like starting on applications and organizing files. Every computer has one of these, but the Raspberry Pi is quite unique because rather than coming with an operating system pre-installed, the Raspberry Pi Foundation expects you to be able to install one yourself. And this is part of what makes Raspberry Pi so flexible for do-it-yourself projects, is that you can use whatever operating system image that you can find online. So for this tutorial, we're going to be setting up the Raspberry Pi as if it were a desktop computer. And we'll do that by right-clicking here, and I will put these links in the description of the video as well. We right-click here and open in a new tab, raspberrypi.com/software/operating systems. And we can find the simplest image for an operating system for Raspberry Pi. This is called Raspberry Pi OS. And Raspberry Pi OS comes in a couple of different flavors. We're just going to use the Raspberry Pi OS with desktop today. Depending on what your project looks like, you might want to use especially the Raspberry Pi OS Lite, which is really good. It's only terminal commands, and it works really well for do-it-yourself projects where you don't necessarily need a lot of images on the screen of the Raspberry Pi at once. This second one here, Raspberry Pi OS with desktop and recommended software, just has more programs pre-installed on the operating system. All of them can be installed on the base Raspberry Pi OS with desktop. So we're going to download that. Okay, so I've downloaded that. It took about a minute, and I've made my mouse pointer a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. In addition to that, so what we're going to do here is we're going to say show in folder, which will open our downloads folder, and there's our operating system sitting right there. It comes in a .exe file, which is a compressed file, which is basically an algorithm that's run to make the file smaller so it's easier to download faster on the internet. But before we use that, we're going to have to decompress it using a utility called 7-zip. Again, this link will be in the description. We open the link in a new tab, and we're going to download the one that we need that is specific for our computer. We have a 64-bit Windows operating system, so we'll download that. And that downloads almost instantly. You click on the exe file, and you install 7-zip, and it takes just a few seconds to install. Now, if you're on Windows 11, all you'll have to do, if you're on 10, it's actually, you can actually skip a step. But if you right-click it here, you go to Show More Options, and we're going to go down to, if you're on Windows, well, on Windows 11 we had to do Show More Options. On Windows 10 you would just go to the 7-zip here, and we're going to extract it to the name of our file. Okay, so that took a little over a minute to decompress, and you'll see that we have a new folder in our downloads folder where our nice decompressed image file is right there. So the next step in our tutorial, after decompressing our OS, is to now flash our OS to a micro SD card. Now to do that, we'll be using a tool called Balena Etcher. And there are definitely other tools that you can use for this, but I've found that Balena Etcher is the easiest to use for beginners because there isn't as much danger of overwriting your computer's hard drive. So we'll right-click that, and we'll download for Windows x86. This website is smart, and it will tell you which version you'll use. It takes a few seconds to download, and then we click the exe file. We need to read the terms and conditions and then agree to them. The program takes a second to install, and now Balena Etcher is on our computer. So we're going to take our decompressed image file and drag and drop it onto Balena Etcher. To flash from a file, we need to select our target, and I forgot to plug in my SD card, so I'm going to log out for just a second so I can plug. Now I've plugged in my SD card, and it appeared as the G drive on my computer. Now Balena Etcher should be smart enough to not overwrite anything, but do be very careful that you are selecting the same drive that you plugged in. So I have a 32 gigabyte micro SD card, and it's at the G drive, and I'm going to select it. I select it, and then I click the flash button. And this is the longest process so far in our tutorial. This will take a few minutes to complete. And if you get a message like this, don't worry about it. As long as that flashing continues to go up, you're in good shape. I will be back when it's finished. Okay, so that took a little bit over 5 minutes to complete. It did a flashing process and then a verification process. And now that we have flashed it onto an SD card, we can close Balena Etcher, and we can basically move on to our Raspberry Pi itself. And you can see a picture here of what it looks like to put the Raspberry Pi SD card into the Pi itself while it's in a case. And the first thing we need to do is eject that device. We've ejected it. And then I'm going to switch to capturing the Raspberry Pi itself so you can see what it looks like the first time we boot it up. Okay, so I've switched to capturing the Raspberry Pi directly. And as I power it on, you guys will see the signal coming in. And there will be a couple of terminal commands that execute. This is normal. It will restart a couple of times. There you can see it coming in. All of this is absolutely normal and is going to happen on the first boot of the Raspberry Pi. And some of these things will happen on following boots too. Okay, so it did its thing and rebooted a couple of times, and you've got yourself a computer here. You can see my mouse and my keyboard. And if you have a Bluetooth mouse, you can pair it now. All of these prompts are pretty self-explanatory. I live in the Denver time zone, and I'm going to use the US keyboard. It's going to set its location, and you just need to go through and set up your account. Pretty easy, like just about any other computer. You'll want your username, which I suggest a strong one. Pi on the fly, and a strong password. If you have any issues, especially if you're on a TV, you might have issues here, but I don't. This will let you connect to Wi-Fi. Once you're connected, it's going to perform a short connection test. Then it's going to ask if you want to update software, and this is usually a good idea. Even if you just barely downloaded your operating system, oftentimes there are some updates that have not been included in the image yet. So you just go ahead and let it do that, and this will take a minute. Okay, so we've installed all the updates and the system is up to date. So we're going to click OK, and it's going to restart the Raspberry Pi one more time. And once we boot back in, I think you're going to be excited about what you see here. Okay, so now that it's fully booted, you can see here something that looks pretty similar to a computer desktop. And that's because that's exactly what it is. We actually have a full functioning computer in our Raspberry Pi now. It even comes with a few things pre-installed, such as programming interfaces like Thonny for Python, and the Chromium web browser for viewing all of your web pages. So it's pretty powerful, pretty awesome, and I know that there were quite a few steps to set it up, but it pays off. And this is the absolute cheapest complete computer that you can find, and you can do all kinds of cool things with it. And if you're anything like me, you'll be experimenting like crazy, and you'll repeat these steps with different SD cards and different operating systems. And once you know how to set this up, it's a breeze to set up and even switch operating systems. There are quite a few, apart from the ones that Raspberry Pi puts together to do all kinds of different things. And, you know, there's so much more that you can do with Raspberry Pi, so keep on checking back here at Raspberry Pi on the Fly for more articles and videos on how to make the most out of your Raspberry Pi.